You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I'm your host, Emily Goodman, of the Office of Library and Information Services, and my pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and discover who our guests are today.
My name is Shannon Carroll, and I am the president and CEO of Genesis Center. My pronouns are she and her.
And hi, I'm Josh Riazzi. I'm the COO of the Culinary Hub of Providence, which is the training restaurant that Genesis Center has founded and launched.
Great. A little bit later in our show, we will talk to Shannon and Josh about the Genesis Center and Culinary Hub of Providence. But to kick it off, what have you both been reading recently?
Great question. I have been diving into some books about global cuisines and flavors. The most recent one is a very classic French cuisine cookbook by Michel Brass called The Essentials of Cuisine.
Because of Chop, normally I don't pay attention to recipes in the New York Times, but every day now I seem to click on recipes in the New York Times because I'm just now getting more involved in the culinary business and I have more of a culinary interest. So I've been reading more recipes. The other thing, I'm actually looking for a book about this, but I'm reading about the Bang Bang Club, which was a group of photojournalists from the apartheid era of South Africa. And it was 4 photojournalists who were, 2 of them had untimely deaths. And it's just something I had never heard of, but it came to my mind because I had seen a picture that it's called The Vulture and the Little Girl, or The Little Girl and the Vulture. It was a photo that's really striking and horrible, but I had never seen it before. And it was taken by one of those photographers. So I'm trying to find a book to read about them.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Well, maybe somebody can help.
Yeah.
What's been your favorite recipe that you found from the New York Times recently?
Oh, good question. I've read so many. There was a roasted tofu dish the other day that I almost sent on to you, Joshua, because I tend to lean in the vegetarian direction, although I'm not a vegetarian. And so I keep suggesting more recipes for Josh. But there was a great roasted tofu dish the other day.
There you go, roasted tofu.
Have you tried shredding tofu?
I have not tried shredding tofu. That sounds like something I would like. I lived in China and Taiwan at one point, so I ate a lot of tofu, including the soft douhua and then dougan, the dried tofu. So, Josh, if you ever want to put any more of those into your repertoire, I'm not complaining. Have you had shredded tofu, Emily?
I have. A while ago, I found a nice recipe for a shredded tofu taco, which was really, really nice with some pickled red onion, some dressing on it. It was really good. I don't tend to like tofu as just sort of a sort of slab meat replacement the way that people make it. So I like that by shredding it and roasting it, it gets nice and crispy and the texture really changes quite a bit. But yeah, Josh, have you done shredded tofu or have another favorite way to make tofu?
If I do it, I like to marinate the tofu, and I oftentimes don't cook it once I've done that. So a favorite of mine is to marinate it in soy, sesame, and some other spices, and basically just let it pick up those flavors, and then dice it and use that tofu as an ingredient in things. Um, but I definitely have had some of the pressed tofu or more dry preparations, and you know, I I'm of the mindset that tofu is hit or miss. I don't generally love tofu, and I think that I'm waiting for that version where I have it and I say, "Aha, that's what people always talk about." But it's definitely not my number one. My wife will vouch for that as well. She's constantly making it, and she looks over and goes, "I know you're not going to have this," but yeah, I'm all about experimenting. So maybe the shredded tofu is the version.
Yeah, give it a try. So you've been diving into various cuisines, worldwide cuisines. Has there been a favorite for you so far?
I think what's so interesting about studying and looking at global cuisine is that there are some techniques that are so rooted in a cuisine, you almost think to yourself, this is 100% the way to do this. This cuisine has mastered it. Why would I try another version of prepping something, to get an outcome? And then you study another cuisine and you go, oh my God, they do it a completely different way. And it still comes out really beautifully. And, that's the thing that studying has really shown me. I'll give you an example is, if you think of something like braising or smoking a meat, or just taking something that generally is a little bit tough and needs some time and some heat and some flavor, to be able to get a really nice succulent texture at the end. If you look at how a lot of the, let's say, American cuisine smoking would do it, is like low and slow, using a lot of smoke and dry heat and just letting the time and the slow temperature and consistent temperature break that down. That's like a very classic preparation that a lot of people know and love, and it kind of mirrors a low and slow technique that you see a lot in European cuisine, which is braising, right? But for braising, you would take that meat and you would sear it first. Like you would get a really nice dark color to the outside. You'd develop some flavors and you'd add liquid to it. If we were doing an Italian braise, you might add some red wine or white wine and some vegetables, and you would let that kind of low and slow do the same thing. Um, but it would kind of have that texture at the beginning that is that kind of semi-cooked texture. And what I've noticed is if you study some of the more, I almost call them kind of tribal cuisines of South America or Latin America. You can imagine people sitting around a cauldron way back when doing these preparations. And, what they do is they cook it low and slow. And then at the very end of it, they crisp it or they'll fry it or they'll do something to add a lot of texture and color. And it's just a very different kind of, I wouldn't say backwards, but it almost is that cooking preparation that maybe the European or the French, would do, the Italians would do, but completely backwards. And both of them give such a great characteristic that there's no right or wrong one versus the other. But going through culinary school and seeing a lot of preparations that are done by you know chefs who I studied initially in my career, I would say one's the right way and the other one can't possibly work. And having studied a lot of those other techniques from some of the students at Genesis Center or some of the food R&D that we've done for CHOP, or just reading and studying in general what other cuisines do, it's been really interesting to see how some cuisines really change that dynamic.
So how do you feel, both of you, about fusion foods?
Mm.
I would say we do a lot of that at Culinary Hub of Providence, otherwise known as CHOP.
Oh
But
yeah.
Josh, that's your
Yeah,
area.
I mean, fusion cuisine is like, it's hard nowadays to not be fusion cuisine, right? And maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you'd see restaurants that would call themselves fusion restaurants. But it's such a global marketplace now. There's ingredients that are available that were never available before. And, if you have an ingredient that is from a different part of the world and you pair it with a local ingredient here in Rhode Island, is that fusion? I think 100% it's fusion. Um, it's really an informed way to cook, and I think it permeates what we do at the Culinary Hub because of the fact that we're rooted in a lot of different cultures from around the world, making up this cultural melting pot of Providence and Rhode Island, and everybody brings a little bit of their food knowledge, whether it's ingredients or cooking techniques, and we want to honor that through the menu at Culinary Hub.
Is there anything on the menu right now that is like a fusion item that you're really excited about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say most of the menu is done in a fusion technique. We have, so I'll give you an example of a salad that we run, which is a classic Cobb salad. But the fusion elements of this is that there are some ingredients added in that have a Caribbean flair to them, like mango and black beans and some pickled vegetables. We also roast our chicken for that dish. So it's a classic Cobb salad with chicken, but we roast our chicken with a marinade that is rooted in jerk seasoning. So it has a little bit of allspice and peppers and almost a sofrito kind of flavor to it, but it does have a little bit of spice and heat, and it kind of mellows the rest of the salad out, makes every bite very interesting. That's the essence of what we do at Shop. We want everybody to see a menu that's approachable, and yet at the same time be introduced to some flavors that they might not otherwise experience or haven't seen in that particular way.
Nice. Shannon, did you get to eat at Chop very often?
I do.
Yeah.
And my favorite, I was just discussing this with a member of our board. There's a Korean cauliflower sandwich. So it's like a fried chicken sandwich, but it's made with cauliflower. It doesn't even sound like it would be great, but it is so incredibly delicious. It is so good. My other favorite is the like a pulled pork sandwich, but it uses shiitake mushrooms. So it's a pulled shiitake open face sandwich. That is also one of my favorites. I think I've tried just about everything on the menu. So, but that's our lunch menu. So in the future, we're going to have some different offerings. And there's been specials when I've gone in. Like you had a banh mi sandwich one day as one of the specials. That was quite tasty. So
Well, before we jump in a little bit more about all of that, have either of you been watching anything recently that you're really into?
I just watched a documentary about it's Mountain Queen about the Sherpa Lapka, I believe is her name, and she I think she's now, even since the documentary ended, she's on her 12th climb. I think she completed her 12th climb of Everest, and now she's done K2 as well. But she works at Whole Foods in Connecticut when she's not
Wow.
going up Everest. Yeah, she's amazing. She is absolutely amazing. And I'm an avid hiker, but I'm not into climbing Everest, believe me. So, but having lived in Asia for several years too, that's just like right up my alley. So her story is absolutely amazing. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it, it's Mountain Queen, the Summits of Lakpa Sherpa. So, but little would you know, if you go into Whole Foods in Connecticut, she may be
She
working
might be
there.
there. Yeah, she might be your
Mhm.
cashier or something.
Oh, and the stuff that she's overcome. So girls were not allowed to go to school in Nepal at the time, and so she would carry her brother to school, and she would just have to sit outside and listen.
Oh my gosh.
And then she would just stare up at the mountain, and she was like, "I'm going to climb that someday." So she started volunteering on climbs when she would. I think she pretended to be a boy for the first couple ones because they wouldn't let girls do it. But yeah, she was the first Nepalese woman to climb up and come down the mountain successfully. There was another one who summited, but unfortunately she didn't make it down the mountain. But man, that's a lot of work.
What's the highest peak that you've hiked?
um, so I've been on higher peaks. I've been to like Peru and the Andes. I think the highest I've actually climbed from the bottom is Mount Katahdin in Maine. That was a fun climb, but I don't usually start at the bottom and then get up. Like I'll be somewhere and then like in Colorado and then go up. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I was recently in Norway this past April, and just the amazing, like you see the fjords and then the giant peaks rise above, just beautiful.
Wow. That sounds incredible. I'm definitely more of a flat hiker. I don't really want to summit. I don't want to go too high, but I do really enjoy views. So that all sounds
Well,
really lovely.
when supplemental oxygen is like highly
That's that's the line that I've
pass on
crossed
that
as
one.
well. Supplemental oxygen. I'm not going to be climbing that peak.
Yeah. But anyway.
So, Josh, what are you watching?
Oh, you're putting me on the
Yeah,
spot now. I have
absolutely.
not been watching much TV. I will be honest. So the most honest answer, and I think I'm going to be outed here with my wife because I tell her I'm not watching, is Love Is Blind.
Okay.
That's definitely taken our culture and community by storm. But I watch it from the other room when I pretend that I'm not watching it because I say to my wife, I'm not watching this show.
Are you watching
And
but only with your ears, or do you have it
and,
on your
and
own screen?
no, so the way that my living room is set up is that I can work or prep something in the kitchen and hear or maybe peek a little look at the TV while it's going on, and it's man, we could have a podcast just on Love Is Blind. I guess we won't do that now, but that's
versus Love Island. So
Yeah.
that
It's
seems to be the other
it's
big
yeah,
one people are
exactly.
watching.
It's a lot of that. It's a lot of watching some of my kids shows while they're hanging out and watching things. I gotta be honest. I have not been doing a lot of documentary watching like Shannon has, but I have a long list. I have a long list that we'll discuss at a different podcast.
I love that. I don't watch documentaries very often, and actually the recent ones in the past year that I've watched have mostly been like true crime, which is not usually a thing that
Oh
I'm into, but for some reason Netflix has been like, maybe you should watch this crazy documentary about this cult and also murder. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll eat that right up.
The algorithm
Apparently,
knows, right? The algorithm knows.
it does know, but and then that's sort of, I guess, segues a little bit. I'm really excited that the fourth season of Only Murders in the Building is coming out, which is a nice marriage of
Mhm.
mystery and podcast and fun.
Mm.
For
And I think
sure.
it's sort of one of the lighter crime shows out there. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm excited
There,
for.
I always say I'm not interested in them, but the hooks are so good. How can
Hmm.
you not want to know how the story plays out?
I know, I agree. Even like the whole Dateline thing, it's like you start watching a few minutes, and like, now I have to know.
I know it. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or like seek
Yeah,
for
true crime is
conclusion.
Yeah.
addictive. I would say
Yeah,
that, yeah. And Netflix scarily knows what I like. They're like, "We think you'll love this." I'm like,
Oh yeah.
"You're right, Netflix."
You're like, I'm not even going to bother saying no. We're watching it.
Yeah. Well, Netflix did recommend, The Mountain Queen to me. They said, "You'll
oh,
love this." I'm like, "I
And
did."
here we
it
are. I know.
knew.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
either watching something like that, or I've also recently started doing a rewatch of Great British Bake Off. So a
Okay.
very
Mm.
cozy baking. Yeah.
Yes. I went through a Great British Bake Off phase, and I will be honest, I don't think I could compete with any of those
Mm.
folks. There's such challenge in that show. Yeah, I think I would flame out in the first episode.
What would be your like biggest downfall?
Oh man, I think that baking in and of itself is such a science
Hmm.
that I have, I understand and like, but I would not be well versed enough to handle all of the challenges that get thrown at those contestants. So I think my biggest downfall is maybe just having a challenge that says do something with a particular type of dough, and I would just,
Mm.
I'd experiment in real time. It would not work out. It would be an Instagram fail of sorts on the show, unfolding in front of your eyes.
No
Uh,
recipes, just vibes from Josh.
and it's so funny that some of the cooking shows I watch, I'd be like, oh, these I think I could throw down on these challenges. But the Great British Bake Off, I mean, when I see those contestants come out with things that you could sell in a bakery, I'm impressed every time.
Me too.
And a lot of them, from what I understand, are not professionals.
No, none of them are professionals. They
Yeah,
are all amateurs. At
really
least when they
wild.
start. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so we can get into the main chapter of our podcast. So, to kick us off, first, since CHOP is a project of the Genesis Center, can you give us an overview of what the Genesis Center is and what kind of programs and things that you offer?
Sure. So, would you like me to start, Josh? So Genesis Center was founded in 1982 by Sister Angela Daniels and Father Daniel Trainer. And at that time, there were many Southeast Asian refugees in Rhode Island. And Sister Angela, who at that time was working at the Assumption Parish Church, which is down the street from where Genesis Center is located. Actually, the Genesis Center, the building that we're in today, was the Assumption Parish School at one point. And Sister Angela was a teacher there, but that had already closed down. So she saw these people wandering around and she got to know them a little bit, and she realized that they had come from the killing fields in Cambodia and had been relocated here after escaping all the horrific things that were going on there. So she thought, well, what we need to do is offer English classes. And so the English classes were, there was an interest, but then attendance started to dwindle off because a lot of the students were women and they had children. And remember, they came from the killing fields where They were so traumatized by things that had happened to their children. Some didn't even know if they had kids who were alive or dead. So she said, well, the only way we'll be successful is if we have English classes and babysitting in the same building. Now, over 40 years later, demographics have shifted quite a bit. So our primary populations are no longer Southeast Asians. And instead of babysitting, we have a full early learning center. So we have a 5-star, Bright Star rated early learning center, and we offer education. We don't call it babysitting anymore. It's actually a school for infants all the way up to preschool. And we have one state pre-K site. And instead of just offering English classes, that's still the bulk of what we do, but we also have a very robust workforce training program. And so the culinary program, which is now the Culinary Hub of Providence's feeder, is and CHOP really is a program of Genesis Center, but it's a social enterprise. But the culinary program was one of our first workforce training programs. Started, I would say, in probably the early 90s, I'm guessing. So it predates me, but it gets a little, the history there gets a little muddled. But I believe it was in the 90s that program started. And now we focus a lot on healthcare training programs. And so we do contextualized English classes for workforce. And then a lot of our students move into healthcare trainings. We offer medical assistant, certified nursing assistant, dental assistant, and pharmacy tech. We also have citizenship classes. We have adult basic education classes. We have a financial opportunity center. So we help people plan budgets and do a comprehensive financial plan with one of our caseworkers. And so they can learn how to use their paychecks and help fund their kids' college careers or buy a house. So we help everyone do that. And it's particularly important when we have people from so many different countries. So as I mentioned, no longer Southeast Asia is our primary demographic. We have a lot of people from Dominican Republic, Central America, Guatemala is a big one. Now we have more and more from the Middle East, but our fastest growing population right now is students from Haiti. And so a lot of times the workforce protocols are quite different and checks and all that. So it's good that we have someone who can support people when they're getting their first jobs in the US and help them navigate through that. One of the programs that has gotten a lot of attention, has been very successful, is our matching program. So it's a savings and matching program. And the first one that we had was Keys to Success. So we have discovered that one of the huge barriers to getting a job and keeping a job in Rhode Island is having a car, because our public transportation system, not to fault anything, but it's very difficult to get your kids to school and to childcare and then get to your job on time. So you really need a car. But if you don't have a job, it's hard to buy a car. So we offer a match savings program where we match up to $2,000 of their savings and help them to figure out the best car for them and make that purchase. But we also do one for culinary entrepreneurs. So Josh, do you want to talk about that for a minute, what that program is?
We've had some really great opportunities to help facilitate students getting into the entrepreneurial route. And the culinary field is one that most students who come to the Genesis Center really express interest in having some kind of an entrepreneurial venture. I think that the industry itself is one that people can wrap their heads around. They, like we've said before, come from places in the world that tend to be very cuisine, um, just very interesting cuisines, and they want to share that with the community. There may be a gap here that they see. We've had one student who I can think of, who's actually an intern currently at the Culinary Hub of Providence, but she went through our basic training program at Genesis and then launched a Haitian meat pie business where she would sell the meat pies for catering events. She would sell them at street festivals. And one of the things we were able to do for her is, every student going through the training takes a Serve Safe certification exam, which in the state of Rhode Island is really helpful because if you want to start a food business or run a food business, you need that certificate. So she passed the training program, she passed the test, and we walked her through the process of certifying her business with the state to become a food vendor. One of the big gaps there is that you need a licensed facility in order to prep your food out of. And we're set up to not necessarily be a full blown incubator like some of the others in the state, but we can do a micro enterprise incubator in our professional kitchen. And in this case, it worked really well because she would come in one day every couple of weeks and prep and produce the particular dough that she would need for this pastry, fill her meat pies and sell them, and really kind of experience entrepreneurship in a way that she was able to digest it. It was, something that obviously she didn't have a ton of money to start. And so all of these things kind of lined up to help her: the training, the certification, using our space in kind of a micro incubator way. But what she noticed early on was that in order to sell enough of the meat pies to make the business viable for her, she couldn't hand produce all of the dough. So she did enroll in the program that Shannon's mentioning, which is a matched savings program. And as she was saving money from her business, she was putting it towards the purchase of a dough sheeter machine, which is a couple $1,000s, and it definitely speeds up the process. This is the type of a machine that a professional bake shop might use to make croissant dough, where you've got the layers of butter and flour and dough all kind of linked together. And when you bake it, it gives you a really beautiful texture. So she was able to purchase that and then really scale her business to be able to satisfy some of the orders she had, which was like a couple of hundred of meat pies that would take, 2, 3 days to produce. She cut that down into a manageable time. And now she feels so confident about that process and about scaling her business that she continued doing culinary training workshops. She's interning at CHOP to be able to understand what goes into running a brick and mortar. And her ultimate goal is, to open a Haitian restaurant. So, and that's kind of a story that I love telling because she's kind of experienced now almost all of the facets, both the culinary training, the IDA program, and she's interning at CHOP and understanding some of the things that we hoped students would participate in once we opened it.
That sounds really incredible, and, like, she'll really hit the ground running by the time that she gets to her brick and mortar, because it sounds like maybe she has a bit of a following already.
I mean, I think that's, our thought is always, how do we meet a student where they are? And, their end goal may be a couple of years away, might be a couple months away, but, we have access to so many things that would take students a very long time to develop on their own. So even the culinary hub, we talking about earlier of having a fusion menu, some of that is developed so that if we run a special offering or if we put something onto, say, the pastry case where our coffee bar is to sell for the day, we can integrate ideas that students are testing and it doesn't sound like it's coming from left field. So if she wanted to make, her Haitian meat patties the very first time and experience whether or not the recipe worked or whether or not there was a demand for it, that could very easily be an item that we would put onto our pastry case. And even that process is informative. And like you said, it helps them hit the ground running when they do branch out onto their own or when they decide to bite the bullet and go out into entrepreneurship. And I should also say, every restaurant or business that we work with is also a link along that way that mentors our students. We have people come in and visit our classes all the time that talk about their journey. We have people who host our students at internships or hire our students for on the job training opportunities. And what they're really doing without maybe even noticing it is they're teaching those students about their version of entrepreneurship and about their business model. And, some of it is the very tactile, like hold this knife and cut this vegetable in this way. And they're definitely sharing years and years of experience, but they're also showing them things like, why do I pick a certain portion size of a meat? Or why do I build a menu in a certain way? And those conversations that happen organically once they're out into the job market are incredible. And we always relay that back um, to our connections in the industry, that what we're codifying through CHOP and through the Genesis training is what's happening in the industry. And we hope that it all links towards that workforce development piece where we're graduating students who are job ready and who understand enough about the business to be an asset to those teams.
So it sounds also like the workforce at CHOP is sort of always evolving. People are sort of
Mhm.
at different stages in their own careers and in this workforce development planning. So, what's that like? How long do people generally stay on staff or as students
Sure.
within the hub?
Yeah, that's a great question because the model is so diverse. We have students from a variety of backgrounds. We have students with different goals, and trying to get them to fit into a normal restaurant schedule is pretty challenging. What we've had success with here in the initial few months is that our trainees from our culinary workshop that we run at Genesis Center get an opportunity to trail with students and mentors that are working at the culinary hub. So they get exposed on a very minor level, but they get exposed to like what that kitchen environment is like, what a day in the life may be like. And they get to ask questions from students who are further along in the training process and really see where some of the theory that they're learning in class can be applied. Once they're done with their training, we offer the experience of an internship at the Culinary Hub, which is a more intensive. So, in the first experience, they may be coming to CHOP 1 day a week and trailing with someone for a few hours. And really, they might get put on one particular station that may not be the station that their ultimate goal is, but they're getting exposed to the venue. Through the internship setting, what they're able to do is do a round in the kitchen and really get experience on all of the different stations and to experience what it would be like to work a restaurant shift. They're there for a few more hours, their hands are on a few more ingredients, and they're starting to see what it may be like to be a restaurant employee. As that internship graduates, we offer on the job paid trainings to our students. So those may be part-time positions, they may be apprenticeship positions, and we really work with each student to figure out what their goals are, what their availability is, and whether this is the best venue for them. Because right now the food industry is in a position where if you're a hardworking person who can show that you're willing to learn and you're reliable, you likely can get a job in the industry. Our positioning is really that we want to graduate the next round of, or the next generation of, really restaurant professionals. So people who understand about management techniques, who understand about the metrics of a restaurant. And those are the things that we're positioned at CHOP to train someone to do. So while we can give them additional time in a kitchen to learn some of those physical aspects, like setting up a station and practicing their knife cuts, we can also offer people, the longer they're with us, some of those additional things, like how to write a prep list, how to deal with pars in a kitchen and make sure that you're set up for success on a busy day, how to order food to a budget, how to produce catered events for in-house parties. And those are the things that I think would take a little bit of time for a student to get access to when they go into a job setting. They may be at kind of the line cook level for a while, and they may not get the opportunity to do some of those other types of things. So we can kind of fast track their experience. And when they graduate, they get into the industry as a more well-rounded employee. The apprenticeship program, that is really that kind of PhD program for us, if you will, is about a 2,000-hour training. And that includes, I would say, about 1 to 2 years of time, whether it's at CHOP, Genesis Center, or with an employer partner. But if you round that entire number up, it's 2,000 hours of training. So it's quite intensive, and it's a bit of commitment on the student's behalf. But luckily for us, we are able to provide a portion of that as a paid training, so the students are able to dedicate the time that um, they may not be able to otherwise.
And so, for some of our listeners may not know that CHOP is based in the Providence Public Library right downtown. So, can you talk a little bit about what that partnership was like and why you
Yeah.
chose the library to be a place where it would all happen?
Yeah, I mean, Shannon, you went through one of the very first conversations and walkthroughs on the space. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really say anything that it was serendipity. So Josh and I both started at Genesis Center in different roles in 2011. So we've been working together for quite a long time at this point. And he was the culinary instructor and I was the VP of programs at the time. But from that point, when we first met each other, we were talking about doing a social enterprise, right, Josh? And we ran the gamut from a food truck to growing plants that could be used in cooking and stuff. So we covered a lot of things. And then back when the library, this was before the pandemic, so late 2018, early 2019, it was a long time ago. We were going on a walk through to see all the renovations they were doing. And we went to one spot, which is now Chop, and the person giving us the tour said that there was going to be a restaurant going in there, but that didn't work out. So they were still looking for a tenant for that section of the building. And it was just an empty brick, you know, vanilla box, as they say, space. Um, and then it just happened to be that I was with my coworker and we kind of glanced at each other, and someone from the library staff kind of saw us glance and glanced at us anyway. So then we're like, maybe we could do something there. And then it happened, another coincidence. I was at Panera in, I think, Cranston the following weekend, and I ran into the woman from the library and said, hey, I saw you look at your coworker. What are you thinking? And then we talked about it, and that's where it started. And so I say it happened with a glance. And the rest is history.
Sounds
I
star-crossed.
know, really. So the glance that started it all. um, but then we really started talking in earnest, and we, worked out a rental agreement, which was, a very generous one from the library for us to build out the space, which was not a small task. It was something really out of my comfort zone to take on this construction task. And thank goodness Josh was there to really help it along. And we had two board members, our board chair and our board secretary, who have been along for the whole ride and have provided invaluable insight for all of this. But we raised some money, and then we were about to dive into it. And then we all know what happened in March 2020. So COVID came, and we had to just put the Culinary Hub development on the back burner because we had students who had really pressing emergency needs. Like we were driving around delivering food. So the staff at Genesis Center is absolutely amazing. And, I'm not going to say I was the one driving around personally, dropping everything off, but the staff, we were dropping off food, rental assistance because people couldn't work. So they were afraid of, not being able to pay their bills. Utility assistance. It was, we were dropping off devices because we had switched to online learning. So we felt like we were in a life or death situation, really. So developing a restaurant really was not a top priority. So I think some of our funders from early on, they were very patient with us, but everyone's like, is this going to happen? But when we finally could turn our attention back to working on this, we got the contractor and the architect and the designer in place. And that's where Josh really jumped in and did this project.
Yeah, and as Shannon mentioned, I mean, it was a lot of things had to align because of the scope of this project. Is the library is a really strategic landlord if you think about the fact that our missions are so aligned that even now as we're open, the day-to-day operations really support each other. We're a resource for the patrons of the library, but also the library is all about learning and we're all about learning. So I think there's even crossover in the design elements of the
Mm-hmm.
space and how we
Absolutely.
lean into the books and the workshop feel of the library. We're actually in if you use our if you use the library's main entrance, we're opposite from the workshop room that the library operates themselves. So there's synergies that both subtle and overt. But
And certainly the design elements reflect that too. So,
yeah,
there are a lot
absolutely.
of books around is built into the design of the space. And um, yeah, I think for someone who came from a family who loved libraries, I feel like it's just so warm and cozy. And, being surrounded by the books and being in the library is just, it felt right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a bit of a quirky space, and I think some of our launch and design and getting open has been a product of using the space and figuring out some of the challenges with a space that was never a restaurant. So as Shannon mentioned, we had a really great design and construction team, and they were able to kind of go through a lot of this legwork of specking
And the
out.
architects,
And, yep, yep, yeah.
they were.
Um, the architect as well, yeah. I was lumping them in the design piece, but you're right. I mean, that's the three prong, right? We had the interior design, the architect, and the builder who really they were able to creatively solve some things going on in the space to make it a really inviting space. And that's the piece that, most people that we talk to who come into the space say, um, this is a cool space for the city to have. It's a great community space. It's a great restaurant space. It's warm. It's inviting, like Shannon mentioned. But we have some of the benefits of the library. For instance, we're positioned right in downtown, near some really beautiful buildings, but also some high traffic buildings like Trinity Rep and the AMP and the convention centers. We have these really beautiful windows on the first floor that are 20 feet tall, and you get a great view of the city skyline as you're sitting there at dinner, and the lights kind of change throughout the day, and in the evening you can see the glow of some of the buildings, and it has a very cool vibe to it.
And I think people are surprised because we have a liquor license, and it is a beautiful space. I think some people, when we talked about doing this, they pictured more like a sandwich shop, like any sandwich shop you might go into. I won't name names, but and so they are surprised in a good way when they walk in and see that it's a quirky yet elegant space. I believe, and Josh is right with the particularly at night with the big windows and the lights from the city and our lights inside the space. It's really it's warm and a place I enjoy being in. I hope others do too.
We've talked a bit about so many of the things about CHOP that sound really inviting and wonderful, right? This lighting and the huge windows and this sort of testing fusion menu. What are your favorite things about the cafe? Like when you go in, what's your number one favorite aspect of it?
Mm.
Yeah,
I can go first if
she
you want.
knows.
Okay, oh yeah,
you
let
know,
me know.
as I was a teacher before I moved into this role, and so really what kind of drives me is lifelong learning. And the real reason I wanted this to come to a reality was as an extension of our existing culinary program, because Josh and his team have done a fantastic job of teaching our students who want to go into this field the nuts and bolts of doing the knife cuts and the safety protocols and how to make really delicious food. But there's so much that goes into doing something like this and running a restaurant. So they learn the front of the house, the back of the house. And I often reference one of our graduates from our culinary trainee who's now working at CHOP. And she seemed really, really nervous. She was, working at the barista station and working at the cash register. And she just seemed a little hesitant, but I've seen the growth in her. We opened June 26th, I think it was, for kind of our short hours. We're just doing lunch. And I've just seen the amazing confidence in her and the development of her skills. And I'm like, that's what we're all about. Like, it's just a wonderful thing to see and ties right into the mission of Genesis Center, all about lifelong learning and opening doors for people. Like, we have people who bring these assets from so many different countries and they're so driven, yet they haven't had the opportunity to really grow and have someone say, hey, yeah, let's do this with you. And they just soar. That's what I like.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a similar way. I guess some of the things that I think are the most interesting and impactful is, I go in every day and learn something from the team here, and that team includes people who are lifelong restaurant workers, but it also includes people who've never worked in restaurants before. I love to talk about food and cuisine with the students who come through a training. They feel like they don't have a lot to offer sometimes because they don't know a lot. And then once you start talking to them about something as simple as coffee, someone, might say nonchalantly, right, I grew up on a coffee farm. And that just, can you imagine how much information they have that we want to know and that our customers want to know when they come in to order a cup of coffee? Like, who's better positioned to understand what we're trying to do? And that's the type of experience I have every time I come into CHOP with somebody is there's really a lot of information. It goes back to that library setting where we're an educational hub. We're called the culinary hub of Providence for many reasons, but that being one of them, that the student base that we work with, while they're fresh in the restaurant scene, it doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to offer, and we're able to promote that here. And they really do, as Shannon mentioned, gain a lot of confidence from that, and that confidence serves them in all of their future endeavors.
I love that you made that connection, Josh, to libraries because when you were saying that, I thought about all of the patrons that I've had in libraries that you wouldn't know what they know until that you start engaging in the conversation with them,
Yeah.
and then you learn all these wonderful stories that people have, and all this expertise that they have. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I love that this is a setting where that's something that we can incorporate in the day to day, because I've worked in many restaurants, and it's very hierarchical. Sometimes there's different tasks that you may know and want to contribute to, but you're not invited to those meetings, and you are not expected to comment on that, and for good reason. There's a lot of moving parts in a restaurant, but we do have the ability here to welcome people into conversations that they may not be typically. And because of that, we can use their knowledge to steer menu offerings or specials, or just maybe a style of service that nobody else was thinking about. And our customer base here is the one that gets to benefit from that. I think what Shannon and I have always talked about when this project was being developed is, we get a chance to talk a lot about the training aspect of it, but we want to develop something, and I think we have developed something that is a great restaurant in its own right. And so having people come in and experience what's been built and set up here and say at the end of their meal, that was a great meal. I was expecting it to be, maybe a nonprofit give back, and here I am to support your cause, but I would come to this restaurant no matter what. I think that's kind of the loop closing in some senses for us to feel like, okay, like we're on a good path here, and there's a lot still to figure out and a lot still to develop. But I think our students, again, are just the ones to benefit, and also the community here of library patrons and people in downtown and Rhode Island in general.
And just, to give a shout out to the library folks, they have been so supportive and wonderful through this whole thing. They've been great to work with. So, um, like I said, I've always felt a kinship to library folks. My mom was a friend of the library, one of the founding members in my hometown. And year after year, we had to work at the library book sales. And yeah, it was where I would meet my friends after school. So yeah, it's just nice to see this and have libraries be part of my life. That, and like Josh said, it's the missions of learning, and I like that tie in too. It's almost like the stories that our students can bring with them could fill a whole library.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I love that. So it also sounds like the CHOP will be a place to go, um, right when you're at the library, when you're hanging out for students after school and for people
Oh
in
yeah.
general, but also a place to go back to time and time again because you never know what's going to be on the
Yeah.
menu. So
We have a lot of evolving things to where you might come in today and experience it in a lunch date. You may come in another time for a coffee and a pastry. You might also come in with a book and use one of our little lounge seats to kind of hang out and just experience your book in a different way. We're getting ready to roll out our cocktail and dinner service. So there's wine, there's cocktails, there's beer as part of it. And I think, that's in a lot of ways the dream for many is to have a glass of wine in the city, reading their new book. And like you said, people have a lot of reasons to come back because the menu changes, and we also have some programming that we're developing that'll help to entice them back in many different ways.
that's great. So be on the lookout for all of that from CHOP. Great. Well, we're going to wrap up the show with a segment that we call The Last Chapter, where we talk about a bookish related question. And I'm really excited because the question that I chose is going to tie right back to our beginning conversation, which is if you could write a cookbook, what would be the central focus of your cookbook? Whether that's cuisine or style or a central recipe, what would you choose?
Josh, that's your neck of the woods.
I mean, so I'm just going to lean back into I have written a cookbook with Genesis Center and some of our students in years past, and the topic of that I think is still relevant in that we find ourselves a lot of time in the urban food desert, which is a term that's been used for a while to talk about lack of fresh and abundant ingredients to cook with. But we work with a lot of resourceful people and people from around the world who find ways to garden on very small plots of land that may exist in the urban areas, and that fusion idea of what can we learn from the community that we live in, and that was the topic of that cookbook, was being able to exist in an urban landscape and also tap into some of the cuisines from around the world and ingredients from around the world that people bring with them and hold very tight. And so that, I think, would still be, I think we would evolve, if I had to do that again, we'd just evolve it to now be the chopped version of that, where we get to make restaurant ready ingredients and products with that same kind of knowledge.
Well, in elevating that a little bit higher too, the fact that it's people from all around the world. Like at Genesis Center, we have about 40 different countries represented. And so we are so proud of that diversity. And I mentioned this before, we look at this as all the assets
Mm-hmm.
coming together. But with CHOP, people love to commune over food. And so the fact that these different cuisines kind of come together with the people who are making them, and it's a chance to talk and chat and be in this beautiful space, and that's what's really developing community.
Absolutely.
Right.
I love that. And I like that this has been a seed maybe for your cookbook 2.0 coming soon, maybe in the next 5 years or so from Chop.
Well, it has. Thank you, Emily. We'll give you some credit there.
Great, excellent. Awesome. Shannon, is there anything that like you personally would write a cookbook about? Would you do a tofu cookbook or something like that?
Oh, you know what I think I would do? I have discovered that there are so many people who are not trained as chefs who have like these really fantastic recipes. And so I would love to,
Yeah, there you
like
go.
my sister, for one, she's just like an amazing cook and she does all vegetarian stuff. Now, my brother is like the meat cook. And so I would just love to compile
There
some of
you
these
go.
recipes
I love
that
a
I
potato
know from
taco.
out
That's
and
one of my
about and
favorite
have
things.
Josh and his students put their magic twist to it and maybe do a cookbook like
Ooh.
that, right?
Ah, there's your Chop 3.0
Mhm.
cookbook
I
to come
keep
later.
those potato tacos my sister makes. I'm trying to get you to make them. They're really good.
She's just gonna make the Chop menu all of her favorite foods, is really what I'm hearing.
That's really what we all do. We're all just jockeying for our favorite.
Yeah. Well, we joked at one point that we'd have sandwiches named after different staff at Genesis Center, and I suggested, yeah, the Shannon will be the sandwich no one else
Shredded
wants.
tofu and more.
I don't do burgers.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me. This has been an excellent conversation, and we'd love to encourage everybody to go to CHOP and experience the cafe and support the Genesis Center. So, any last shout outs, Shannon or Josh, about how people can support Genesis Center and or CHOP?
I want people to come and experience it for themselves. So come down to CHOP.
Absolutely. And we have a website that's launched. You can see our menu on the website. You can see our hours. You can get onto our mailing list so that once our event schedule is published, you're first first in line to book reservations for different workshops and things that we're promoting. So www.culinaryhubpvd.com.
And I will also remind people that this is a social enterprise. And so any of the quote profits from it get folded back into the mission. So donations, to support the mission of Genesis Center. Genesis Center is the training provider of this entity CHOP. So any donations are charitable deductions.
Always good to know, yeah. And we'll put those links in our show notes for today's episode so you know right where to find them. Thank you again both so much, Josh and Shannon.
Thank you, Emily.
Emily, it was great to spend some time talking about CHOP with you. Thank you for having us.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you'd like to respond to the last chapter question to let us know what you would write a cookbook about, or just reach out to the show in general, you can send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com, or you can find us at overdoingitpod on Instagram. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and is brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. And this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.